presentation, we'll keep an eye on the various different questions that come up throughout the chat, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the session. Designing Dashboards That Deliver focuses on themes and bits from a new book that we had come out in September, Designing Dashboards That Deliver, that I wrote with three different co-authors. And if you're curious to dig more depth into some of the use cases and examples from today, I'd encourage you to check out the book. But today's presentation is going to focus on four kind of key things. First, talking about our Dashboards That Deliver framework for approaching dashboard design and development, and then walking through three different use cases that teach us different lessons about the importance of the early phases of the framework and not diving too fast into the development lifecycle. The three examples we'll talk about come from three very different scenarios within the book, which is all of the second section of the book, 15 different real-world scenarios on how great dashboards got built. That'll focus on a very practical dashboard from the Children's Hospital Association, another nonprofit, from an IndyCar racing team. So a very different example than the Children's Hospital Group. And last, from my friends at NASA at the Earth Information Center, and how dashboards that deliver principles translate into a projection that goes on a 20-foot long hyperwall. So I hope that everyone joining us tonight sees something that's relevant and connected back to your work, or at least something that you're curious about in the ways in which we make design decisions as data visualization professionals. Like I said, I wrote the book that we're focusing on the themes from tonight with three different co-authors, Andy Cotgrave, Jeff Schaefer, and Steve Wexler, and I want to make sure I give them each a moment in the spotlight. Andy is a former Tableau evangelist who was there for almost 15 years. If you're a Tableau person, you probably know him from the Iron Viz competition that happens each year. And he is now working independently, focusing on data communications training and consulting. Jeff Schaefer is the director of the Applied AI Lab at the University of Cincinnati's Business School down in Cincinnati, and is someone who's been experimenting a lot with using AI tools for data visualization and teaching large organizations how to do so. And last, Steve Wexler is the founder and principal of Data Revelations. He is also someone very deep in the Tableau ecosystem, as is Jeff, but Steve's focus is very much on visualizing survey data. So if you're curious about survey data visualization, Steve is a great follow. I, the second on the screen, am Amanda Makulec. I have been working on dashboard development and data visualization design more broadly for about 15 years, but my roots are actually in public health. I have a master's degree in public health and an undergrad degree in zoology and sociology. And if you want to talk more about career transitions and how I landed where I am today, I'm happy to have that conversation in the Q&A. I spent most of the last 6 years both working independently as a consultant and running the Global Data Visualization Society, which is a great space for connecting with folks around the world who do data visualization design and development. And it was one of my colleagues from that organization who actually introduced me to the folks at Chai Hack Night. So delighted to be here. Thanks to Amy Cecil. So for the purpose of tonight's presentation, I think it's worth going ahead and level setting on what I mean when I say the word dashboard. And we're going to use the definition of a dashboard from the Big Book of Dashboards, my co-author's original book on the topic. That is a visual display of data used to monitor conditions and or facilitate understanding. Now, this seemingly simple sentence, they will tell you, was actually the most fraught in the first book, to find ways to go ahead and define what a dashboard is. Do you specify and include things like a dashboard has to be interactive? Or could a dashboard just be a set of automated Slack emojis that show up every morning that are a visual display of some kind of data? Did things get better or worse overnight? Used to monitor conditions, right there, and facilitate understanding. Now, three Slack emojis we might not necessarily think of in our visualization of dashboards as a dashboard, but this definition is meant to be broad and wide and encompass a lot of different ways in which we might interpret the word dashboard. But I think one of the challenges we have with dashboard design is that kind of murkiness of definitions. And I perhaps have been the subject of very poorly targeted marketing, but ThoughtSpot really wants me to know that they think that dashboards are dead. Now, the ThoughtSpot is a company that markets itself as actually beyond dashboards to letting people instead create various different charts using natural language searches against a central data repository, and then combining those charts into a single live board, which looks a lot like a dashboard. But my beef with the ThoughtSpot campaign isn't as much the sentiment that they feel like dashboards are dead, because I think that we can see a lot of challenges in how dashboards have been deployed and developed, but rather the subtagline of dashboards have failed to deliver on the promise of a data-driven culture. And as someone who spent a long time working on monitoring, evaluation, research, and dashboard development within public health and other spaces, I think that the promise that dashboards themselves can change us to be data-driven and can really entirely change our culture is a bit misguided. But there are plenty of people willing to opine on that topic from all these different headlines around will AI kill the dashboard? Dashboards are dead. Why dashboards are dead, the death of the dashboard. There are plenty of people who want to write articles about this. And I think that there are certainly ways in which dashboards are being sunset and not used as widely in some spaces. There are certainly ways in which Gen AI tools are stepping up and having us access data more easily. But there are a lot of data governance constraints and challenges and data literacy challenges around using many of these new tools. Now, you'll see a lot of different demos these days of dashboard design tools that promise you that if you just go ahead and type lots of prompts into into a window inside of a tool, it'll go ahead and spin up a dashboard for you. But just because you can build a dashboard doesn't mean it's one that will be useful. And I think that Zach Bowders has one of my favorite points about the campaigns right now around the ways dashboards are dead, because he said if dashboards are dead, why do we use them every day on our wrists and our cars, etc.? The thing that we find in dashboards that are well developed and that we actually enjoy engaging with, like on the Apple Watch example that he has here, are dashboards that actually are simple to the point and give us the information we need where we need it. So I'd be curious from your side, and we're not going to do an actual kind of real live poll, but think in your head and maybe put in the chat box, how much do you agree with the statement, most dashboards fail? Now, that could be you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree, but how much do you agree with the statement that most dashboards fail in this world where dashboards are dead? We asked this question to over 450 different dashboard creators as part of writing the book, and we found that 71% of people surveyed actually agreed that most dashboards failed. And that feels pretty damning to hear from people who are our colleagues and collaborators who are building and designing dashboards and data visualization tools. Now, you can ask them questions about what they conceptualize as dashboards and really what they conceptualized as failure. What does it mean for a dashboard to fail? But when we're talking about building tools that enable people to interact with and explore data, and we're saying that 7 out of 10 of them fail, that is a pretty challenging space. So, why do dashboards fail? Hearing that lots of people think they fail prompts us to ask that question. Why do dashboards actually fail? And many dashboards that fail skip the conversations that inform the design, and they dive right into development. In our design framework, we include 3 different things that need to happen before you get into the weeds of the development lifecycle and the development phase, and enables you to spend more time thinking about who your users are and what they want to know. Now, I blame the tech stacks and the tools a little bit for this dive right into development. If you pull up any of the teasers or have ever gone to a marketing pitch from someone pitching you Power BI or Tableau or Click or ThoughtSpot or something else, you'll see that they all lead off with the ways in which getting started and doing things in the tools is so easy. Now, just because you can build something in a dashboarding tool or framework doesn't mean it's a great thing to do or to use. And so these tools have promised us all of these things. Getting started with Power BI is easy, turns your data into automated AI-driven actions. Search for insights the way you'd ask any colleague a question. There's so many dependencies underneath that in terms of how we build out our different data visualization tools when we're building them for others and how we engage and interact with data ourselves. Speed to release, this idea of getting something up on a screen quickly, isn't the real measure of dashboard success. So when we think about failure, we have to think about what success looks like. And one of the challenges we have in dashboard development is oftentimes we're talking about success in little s success. The things we can count, things that are directionally useful, like monthly active users, page views, hours saved. If you're counting the number of hours of manual labor a dashboard is kind of replacing for you. And these little S success measures are valuable, but they are not the end all be all of saying whether a dashboard was impactful. Big S success, as we frame in the book, is really measuring the organizational impact you have from a dashboard or suite of dashboards. And these come more qualitatively as stories of the dashboard being used to inform strategy, make decisions, and they're harder to measure. The measurement is often not automated. You have to hear from someone that they used a dashboard in a certain context. And so as we think about why many dashboards fail, I think we have to also kind of reset ourselves and how are we measuring success? And that's part of the initial startup phase of thinking about a successful dashboard development process. Now, our framework starts and works through a cycle that is very iterative in the sense that you are constantly moving kind of in a cycle and could spend some time in any of these one different sections or places. But some people might ask, why even bother to map out some very specific framework? Is this something that I have to follow for every single dashboard I build? I had a question from the Twin Cities Tableau user group where the leader said, how often do I have to actually go through all of these phases for a dashboard to be effective? Is it like one out of every two? Is it more or less? And for me, having a framework is useful because frameworks give us a shared language to use when we talk about our development process and a set of tools for data teams to rely on. I spent a long time working on teams building different dashboards and data visualization projects, and having ways that we could collaborate and have a shared understanding of how the work got done mattered, and having ways that we actually embedded engaging our users and our audiences in those processes were even better. For this reason, our framework incorporates a lot of ideas around agile software development and also user-centered design and pulls them into that dashboard development lifecycle. And we dive into those different pieces a lot more in the book, but there's a few different pieces I'll call out specifically because I think they're really important as we build out dashboards as a tool. These different frameworks also can give us a very structured way to think deeply about the people and process parts of the design and not just about the tools and tech stacks that we're using. Things like how we break down work into different cycles. So thinking about different sprints or other ways of breaking down the overall project life cycle. And actually breaking down our work from big tasks to smaller ones, which is very common in agile software development, where we focus on taking one big task and breaking it into smaller pieces that are more manageable and can be achieved on a more routine or regular basis. Now, at the start of our dashboard development framework, we talk about the need to have a spark, some reason the dashboard is being developed. And in my mind, a dashboard that doesn't get built because you go and you say, why are we building this? And the answer is because someone needs to check a box on their quarterly reporting. Or the answer is because someone asked for it but doesn't have any clear sense of how they'll use it. Having a dashboard die at that point isn't failure, that's success, because you're not actually wasting a lot of time and resources on building a tool that people don't need. Then you need to spend time understanding your users' needs. And this is where we dive into dashboard discovery and thinking about the ways in which we can understand who's going to use the dashboard and how. Now, if you're someone who works in software development and you think about developing applications a lot, this might feel like a very obvious thing to do. I remember when I first started talking about user-centered design with my dad, who was a mechanical engineer, and talking about how great it was in public health that we were spending more time going and talking to people and understanding their needs and listening to them. And he laughed in my face. Because he said, how do you build and design things for people without having them be part of the process? Now, our discovery component is framed out specifically as the first of two diamonds on purpose. This is because this is the first half of the double diamond framework from the British Design Council, which focuses on actually defining what problem we're going to solve. So here we're gathering many insights from our users and then narrowing in and focusing on the primary requirements we're going to serve. We want to listen to all the different insights and things we can hear about who's going to use the tool or the dashboard, and then focus in on what we're going to actually deliver on. We cannot build dashboards that are made for everyone because oftentimes those end up being dashboards that really serve no one. We'll talk a little bit more about prototyping in a few minutes. When we're in our discovery phase, we want to go beyond asking people what they want to see and instead understand why and how someone will actually use their dashboard. When I have conversations with people about building a new dashboard or starting a new design process, if I walk in and say, tell me what charts you want, people will give me some prescriptive answers, perhaps, or not even know how to answer the question. If I start to probe and ask about how or when they're going to use this tool or what their data needs are, or just about their job more broadly and get them talking, they're more likely to surface some of the ways in which they'll use this tool in their work. One way that we frame these out inside the book, and again, borrowing from the world of agile software development, is using a user story framework where we rethink how we map out requirements instead of being a laundry list of metrics and KPIs as a stakeholder name, some kind of person. I need some kind of information in order to do something. And when we actually are able to map out a few key user stories that a dashboard needs to be responsive to, we're able to start finding clues about what design decisions we'll make in the dashboard itself. So I work a lot in public health, so we'll take a public health example. As a regional manager, I need to understand if a district in my region is having persistent stockouts of key vaccines in order to identify if stockouts are a regional issue or reallocating supplies could address gaps. When I look at the different words here, I can look for clues as to things that I might use to inform what I will actually build as a dashboard developer, building out a health logistics dashboard. Seeing words like a district, my region, persistent stockouts, reallocating supplies as a goal. And each of these things gives me some insight as to something I might need to include, or around the level of granularity I'll need to include on my dashboard. Seeing the insight around needing to see data from my region says I need to filter to a single region at a time. And seeing information about a district means I need to actually be able to drill down to a district level, not just looking at regional aggregations. Persistent tells me I need to see patterns over time, and vaccine stockouts is our key metric, which can prompt me to think about what other data I might want to look at to explain what's happening in those stockout measures. And seeing that the goal is perhaps reallocating supplies gives me insight that perhaps geography actually is meaningful here. And a map isn't just something pretty or nice to look at, but can actually help people make logical decisions about where nearby other facilities are, where we can reallocate and move supplies. And as we think about the ways in which we make design decisions, actually having these user stories and other artifacts from the discovery process that we can anchor onto are really important because they give both our team and us as individual designers a shared understanding of who we're developing for. Then, after we work through our discovery phase and go into great depth in understanding our audience, we move into prototyping and create rapid prototypes for quick feedback instead of skipping to development, which often requires that we have some kind of sample data set available to us that we can prototype with, or that we've had a lot of the data engineering work completed, which creates a dependency. The second part of the design double diamond, focusing on prototyping, is all about making sure that we're building the right thing. We're brainstorming many different visual design ideas, and then we're consolidating our charts into some kind of validated mock-up that our users have had the opportunity to see and view and give input to. So let's take a simple question, one that has nothing to do with a lot of complicated data. How would we give someone the experience of getting from point A to point B if we wanted someone to get between two places within a neighborhood? Now, if we're going to build them a car eventually as the end product, we could start with one wheel and then a wheel with two axles and then add in a chassis and then compile it all together. And at the very end, they'll have something that gets them from point A to point B. But what if my vision of what I'm building is that I think they need a Kia Telluride to haul a bunch of gear and kids, and they really wanted some kind of little Boxster convertible? Now, if instead we focus on actually building incrementally more complex ways of them to actually move from point A to point B, we might learn things as they actively actually move from point A to point B about the routes that they like to take and about some of their experiences of making that commute between those two places and points. And they can actually get the experience of doing the thing faster, which can give us better feedback on what we're actually building and designing. When we think about this in the context of dashboards, you can think about that kind of that skateboard as being kind of the wireframe, the static wireframe, some boxes on a page, over to a simpler bike or motorcycle that is our static mock-up that includes some charts and graphs for feedback, and then moving over into an active prototype that someone can really start to see how the dashboard's going to come together. And getting input and feedback on each of these different key points is critical to making sure our users and stakeholders feel engaged. Now, sometimes that's as simple as a sketch. We have dashboards in the book. Splash is from a nonprofit organization doing water and sanitation work that Jeff Schaefer and Christy Martini led. And then the Big Mac Index is actually from The Economist. And we have the whole story on the process from how they launched their first Big Mac Index dashboard in the publication in 2012, and then made multiple rounds of edits and changes over the years. But in both cases, the original designer diagram was as simple as a sketch. Then we can start to refine and create digital mock-ups from those sketches that users can review. And there's value in things that look less finished and less polished. The more time and effort we put polishing up something and making it look beautiful, the less likely it is that our users will want to give us really detailed, nuanced feedback in some cases, because it will look like you already put a lot of time into that end product. But at some point, we have to start bringing in all of the stuff on the left, the branding, title information, text, instructions, guide, navigation, data sourcing, that goes along with the different key performance indicators or bands, big ass numbers, or charts that we have on the dashboard. And this example is actually one from the book as well, from the Jefferson Boys bowling team that was developed by Kevin Flurledge. As we're starting to think about those design decisions, we start to look at ways to do things like encode information with color, like using sequential or diverging color palettes, where we actually encode quantitative metrics with color. Or we think about using categorical colors, where different colors represent different categorical components, which can be as simple as a monochrome dashboard, like the Project Wise outputs that has white on a blue background. Or it can start to have actual metrics that are encoded and connected to colors, like the Johns Hopkins University COVID dashboard that used red for cases, white for deaths with a certain degree of solemnity, and a green for vaccine cases or doses. And you might immediately look at this and say, my gosh, this is an accessibility nightmare, red and green together. But one of the good pieces about this specific use of red and green is that the two colors are not ever used together on one chart, that you have to differentiate them. They are instead just used to differentiate between different measures, albeit still perhaps an accessibility flaw, a fail in some ways. We also, when we're using categorical colors, we'll start to think about how do we bring in the ways in which we've used colors in other spaces and other dashboards and other products as an organization. And here we can go to our organization's data viz style guide. If you don't have one, they're a great resource to have and create. Um, I worked on the revisions for the one at USAID for the Office of HIV/AIDS when I was still there before USAID got shut down. And we looked at ways in which we could have it be consistently across dashboards, show data associated with USAID outputs or funding in a dark blue compared to a lighter blue for the CDC or green for the DOT. And having these consistent ways of actually presenting data was really important when we're working with an organization with dozens, if not in some spaces, hundreds or thousands of dashboards. We also in dashboard development can do what Kevin had done in his bowling dashboard, which is to use a highlight or alerting color where we let a lot of context fade into the background with gray by highlighting only one specific set of data points, or alerting people by using an orange or other alerting color in doing so. And this can help lead someone through a series of charts to see patterns and focus on one specific piece of information. And gray is a powerful color in data visualization. You can see here that Kevin actually allows you to pick a single player and go ahead and highlight their patterns of information. Sorry, I wondered how long it would take before my coughing. This, though, brings us over to development. Once we actually have a clear spark and reason for the dashboard to exist, we have done our discovery work. We have tested our prototypes with our users. Then we move over into and start developing in our tool of choice. Now, it is helpful to know what that tool is early on because there may be some constraints around the chart types you can use, which impact what you actually put into your prototypes. But this is the place at which the data engineering and the design world starts coming a bit more together, and you start using some of your real data or sample data to build out what the charts and graphs look like. Then we talk a lot about the importance of having a purposeful adoption and release cycle where you actually have a game plan and think about things like change management and communications and how you push a dashboard out into the world. And what that looks like can look very different for very different organizations. And we walk through what that pattern is for 15 different scenarios throughout the book. And then finally, enhancement planning, where we're actually taking in requests from users on an ongoing basis in a way that we can actually prioritize them over time. So let's go ahead and chat a bit about 3 different examples that I pulled up earlier today. First, talking about why discovery mattered a lot for the Children's Hospital Association. This is the Children's Hospital Association dashboard. It's an anonymized view of it. You can see Betzendahl Hospital at the top. That's actually Lindsay Betzendahl's last name. She's one of the designers on it. But this is a pretty kind of standard corporate looking dashboard, right? You have a series of different cards that have different pieces of information, a big number, some kind of reference for how I'm doing compared to others on the bar. with the dot, and then some comparison to the previous year. And when they were building out this dashboard, one of the things that they did early on was to actually define a set of personas based on their own discovery work. And two of their personas were C-suite executives, a CEO who, importantly, they said insights needed to be comprehended within 90 seconds. And then second, a C-suite executive from a member children's hospital where they had maybe 5 to 8 minutes with the dashboard. Now, these dashboards are being used by various different hospitals across the country who are members of the association. And they certainly didn't speak to people at every single hospital, but they did gather enough insights to start to understand who the illustrative personas were for these different individuals. Based on the feedback they got and the 5 different personas they built out, they mapped out a very simple high-level wireframe that mapped up the various different pages that would be in the dashboard and which personas they were connected back to, and then started working through the process of developing their prototypes. This is a sample mock-up that you can see has some more complexity to it in terms of additional bar charts that were dropped eventually. And they started to go ahead and get feedback on this kind of key metrics summary report, which was the first page on the dashboard. And when they were doing that, they asked themselves, could someone really look at this and glean insights in 90 seconds or even in 5 to 8 minutes? When they were having those conversations and realizing how complex the dashboard had actually become with many different tooltips and filter selections and things that you had to do to get to a view that was meaningful for you, they ended up realizing that they needed to add another view into their wireframe. This was what created their key opportunities page, which actually focuses in on only 4 key measures rather than 9, and allows them to see quickly which of these measures are performing well or not. So those that are alerting in orange, like the 30-day readmit in the bottom left-hand corner, have a little alerting icon and the color palette changes. There's also some plain language text across the top that describes some of the key information that an executive might want to know. Now, this won't give you all the information you need to answer why is the 30-day readmit lower than expected or than we want it to be, but that's where the other 21 pages in the dashboard come into play to let you dive into that data in more depth. This comes back to the importance of going beyond what we're building that looks nice and is very useful, and understanding why and how and when someone will actually engage with the data and how much time they'll really have. Second, let's talk a little bit about how prototypes are valuable in helping you fail fast and pivot. So this is from a professional racing team. Michael Gethers is the developer behind this dashboard. When he started his job with this team, he was presented with a series of many different tables and a track map that gave you another insight as to which parts of the table correspond to parts of the track. The goal of this was to see where cars were performing at or above or below expected paces on different sections of the track with different amounts of curvature and different kind of components in terms of the overall shape. And when I look at this, I find this very overwhelming. But I am not a racing team analyst. I don't really know much about racing, to be honest. People who use these tables understood them. But there was an opportunity for Michael to go ahead and redesign them into a more consolidated analytical application. And so we asked, what could I do as a designer to make these tables easier to interpret and understand and analyze? It's a very fair question to ask. And so we came up with a beautiful, very elegant design with some very nicely chosen chart types. The prototype looked like this. These are rain cloud plots. Rain cloud plots are where you can actually really see the distribution of various different runs around the track, as well as measures of statistical tendency, and see the overall shape of that distribution in those curves. So the challenge that he had was, sorry, team, he showed these charts to the various different people who were used to the tables, and they said, I don't understand them. These do not make sense to me. And so he was sent back to the drawing board to think about what he could build that people would want to engage with. This changed the question he was asking over from what could he do to what could I do for my users to make these tables easier to interpret and analyze. This led over to the first iteration of the dashboard. You can see the various different sections for filters across the top, where they could actually take their table structure that they were used to and the track they were used to, and go ahead and iterate, change and reshape it and filter in different ways. So it felt familiar to them, which is valuable when we're doing new dashboard development. But he said that aesthetic appeal is actually a vital part of dashboard success. And a clean, uncluttered design eliminates distractions. So he said, what else could we do to make this even more engaging and appealing now that we've brought people along into this world of using this new analytical application? This brought him from the original design that you see on the left that has the table structure along with the track map over to building out what it looked like on the right, which gives you increasing amounts of information. We brought back those distribution plots in the form of these dot plots, where we really highlight and draw attention to a specific run on the track with those large dots. And we even changed the color palette so that the color palette looks different. If you look at the list on the top, you can choose like stoplight or hot, cold, or plasma colors. And this was a much more successful launch because this brought people along on a journey where they were able to move to the things that they wanted to see. Our last example, if I can make it through, is around breaking the rules for attention rather than speed to insight. This focuses on the work from NASA, from the team behind earth.gov. If you haven't visited earth.gov, it's a wonderful website packed with data. And it embodies this pragmatic shift that Alberto's talked about in the past, about shifting away from rules and over to making justifiable decisions and choices, where we're not picking one specific right answer in data visualization design. Now, as I alluded to in the very beginning, this Earth Information Center inside of the NASA headquarters building in Washington, D.C. is on a 20-foot long hyperwall. It was very cool. It was near my old house in D.C. where I lived for 15 years. And on the hyperwall, there are a series of different dashboards that actually are presented as part of a loop that also includes other content, including video content and beauty pieces, which we'll talk about in a minute. There are global views on each side, which are these kind of porthole type size screens that you see, as well as the big kind of header and knowledge hub, hero image and knowledge hub. Now, there's something very obvious when you look at the dashboard here that's very different from our normal rules of dashboard development, where we say put the KPIs at the top in the upper left, make them big. So we focus on those first. But they were deliberately moved to the lower right-hand corner because of the fact that the team wanted people to read the context first in the descriptions that are on the header and knowledge hub. They also look for ways to take visual inspiration from different spaces. So this is actually looking out of a porthole from a ferry in the Aegean Sea from one of the developers behind the Earth Information Center. And she took this inspiration and this idea of a porthole with water going up and up as inspiration for how you might visualize sea level rise and watch the sea go up and up and up over the course of years as we think about sea level rise as a consequence of climate change. The actual installation looks like this. So when you actually see it in the installation, you actually see this kind of wobbling sea level rise that moves up and up and up over the years and is animated. And what's amazing is that it's this visual metaphor that draws you right into exactly what's being visualized. It's about water and sea going up. And it connects us back in more emotive ways, even if not quite as perfectly precise as, say, maybe like a slope chart or something else. Now, the dashboards themselves do look very dashboardy, and you can interact with them and see the real-time satellite data on the earth.gov website. But some of my favorite components of this entire installation are not the dashboards, actually. They're the pieces that are put with the dashboards to help connect people to data and information. This is my tiny astronaut at the age of 5, now he's 6, watching a video about air quality in DC that's part of the loop. And what was amazing is when we were talking to their team, Mark Subarow, who's the lead for the Scientific Visualization Studio, said, I don't care if people can accurately pick a number off the graph and decode information. If people are scrolling on their phone, I'm trying to get their attention. Because the Earth Information Center was built in the NASA headquarters building, right down the street from the Capitol Hill, to enable policymakers and other folks to come and watch and listen and learn about what was happening to our climate and to our world. And it's an incredible space for inspiring that kind of engagement. And there's some great pictures on their website from people like Bill Nye visiting. But when you look at what's on there, there are amazing pieces that have nothing to do with quick speed to insight of information. This dashboard is about engaging and getting people to pause and stop. This is actually a rainbow mapped set of ocean currents. Do I have any specific insight I'm drawing from this or analytical findings? No. But Mark's comment really rings true in a lot of ways for a lot of us as data viz developers and dashboard creators that we're often competing for attention. Maybe not in the same scale or the same context as the NASA team, but we are competing for attention as we try to get people to engage with our data products. So what? So why does this all matter? Why is it important to think about dashboard development and think about user-centered design and data visualization? The practical reality is that, and the study is a few years out of date, I think, at this point, but 90% of business leaders cite data literacy as key to companies' success. That number is probably going up as we see more enthusiasm about AI growing. But only 25% of workers actually feel confident in their data skills. And I think that when we think about how do we bridge that 90-20 gap, we can do that by meeting our users where they are as we design new data tools. Or data visualization is often the thing that gets people engaged with data first. It's a little bit less scary than big tables or databases. And data visualizations and dashboards can be used not just on a computer alone, but in spaces where we're actually bringing them up during meetings and asking questions of our data and exploring what's happening in meaningful ways. Because it's not just about building more pretty dashboards. We actually succeed when we focus on how data gets used. So with that, if you're curious to dive in a bit more and read instead of listening to me cough throughout the presentation, you're welcome to check out the book. Always happy to have folks check out Dashboards That Deliver. And if you're looking to find me specifically, you're welcome to find me on my website, on Substack. I occasionally post on Substack or over on the Data Visualization Society. But with that, I will hand it over to Tamara, see, this is where I'm going to get your name wrong, to go ahead and facilitate our Q&A section of the presentation.
There you go. Thank you, Amanda. That was amazing. I think that I didn't realize how much dashboards were failing until your presentation. At the beginning, I was like, oh, they're okay. And then I was like, oh my gosh, they're not actually a lot of them. So anyways, so it was really interesting to hear the process of how they can be improved. And I think it's very helpful for me in other ways as well. So here are some questions. So if you have more questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat, but I have some that are here. The first one was, what is it like to write a book with 4 people? Is it
Oh,
faster or 4 times harder?
it is not faster, that's for sure. I mean, I think our proposal went in November of 23, and our book contract was signed in January 24. Don't quote me on those dates, but it took almost 2 years to actually write the book, get it through editing, do all the things. There's over 293 total images in the book, so graphics and images slow things down. It's all in color, so the book is
Yeah.
all in color. And every single chapter went through reviews and edits by all of us. There isn't a chapter that any of us skipped over or didn't review, though you'll see a lead author or pair of authors on each of the different chapters.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
It
That's cool.
helps that we all worked together on Chart Chat, our podcast, for years before writing this book together, and my co-authors had written a book together. So I think they knew some of the pain points that
So
could
you
come up at
already
that
like
point.
understood each other and
We
how to
did, yeah.
have discussions.
We were not a newly created author team, and we knew who the perfectionists were going to be and who was going to say, let's just let it run.
Yeah, definitely. Another one. So, oh yeah. So I was like with the dashboards, when you talked about how the dashboards being dead, were the options just customized dashboards? Because it just seemed to me when you were talking about them that they were also dashboards, just they weren't there to begin with. Like you just customize them. Is that?
Oh, ThoughtSpot. Is that what the one you're talking about when I was talking about
Yes.
ThoughtSpot and the live
Mhm.
boards?
Yeah.
Yes. So I don't think it matters how the dashboard got built on whether it's called a dashboard or not, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you give me an array of various different numbers and charts placed together in some way, shape, or form to monitor conditions or facilitate understanding,
Yeah.
looks like a dashboard to me. My favorite in our research for the book, my favorite rebranding of dashboards was a company that was calling them algorithmic cockpits. I mean, I don't even know what to say to that.
I don't even
I
know.
think
Yeah.
that there's, I think there, the one, so an anecdote I didn't say during the chat about the racing team is that comically enough, Michael has said point blank that he does not call them dashboards inside of the company because there's a lot of kind of negative sentiment about dashboards being old or not being useful or other things. And
Yeah.
so he calls them analytical applications, which is comical for being the racing team where you're in cars with dashboards. And it's the one
Really?
chapter where he very, very firmly does not call them dashboards. He calls them analytical applications. But to me, that's good change management and communications and knowing your audience and knowing
Yeah.
that if I say we launched a new dashboard,
Yeah.
people wouldn't look at it. But if I
Yeah.
say, come check out your new analytical application for track speed or whatever else, people
Mhm.
will think that that's really cool and come hop on and see what's going on.
Oh, that's true. How the words you use matter, right?
Yeah.
Very much. Here we go. So then I have, isn't a dashboard, this might be along the same lines, just a specialized application which should
Mhm.
follow software development lifecycle methodologies.
Great
So it
question. Actually a great follow on to the question around how we build analytical applications and don't just call them dashboards.
sounds.
Sure, you could follow a very similar software development lifecycle methodology. I mean, clearly borrowed a lot from Agile in our approach. I think there's a few key things that make some of the software pieces not work as well. And the company I worked for, Excella, for 6 years, they did a whole rapid analytics framework that kind of blended together, kind of reframed some of the Agile methodologies around dashboards as a product. One of the challenges with dashboards is that you have these two things that are happening in parallel, where you're working on the understanding of user needs and the front end design decisions
Oh.
and the data components in parallel. Really, you want to make sure that what people are asking for you actually can get. The data is
Mhm.
actually collected.
Mhm.
And as you're looking at what data is available, you want to make sure you don't ignore things that might be useful to folks that they just might not be aware of. And so
Mhm.
I think that there's some parallel work that happens there. And I think it's a lot harder to size tasks with dashboard development because, especially the data engineering stuff, sometimes you really just don't know how much
Mhm.
time and
Yeah.
labor and effort it's going to take to clean
Yeah.
and get data just so for dashboards. I
Yeah.
also think that it is great to say that that is a specialized application that we should all just follow software development stuff. But a lot of people who build dashboards, especially in nonprofits, in public health, in spaces where I work, they are not familiar with software development methodologies. And
Yeah.
so
Mm.
if I say, I want you to learn how the software approach so that you can build your data tools,
Mhm.
I would lose people. Whereas if I say we've adapted kind of the best kind of parts of that work best for us from software development, from user-centered design and other spaces to this framework specific to
Double
dashboards, which are
advantage.
the thing that I build as an
Yeah.
epidemiologist or something like that,
Yeah.
you get more people engaged and curious. And there's a lot of good conversations about like the productization of dashboards and how we think about them as products and reshaping that mindset, but not going so far that we focus all on aesthetics, which I think is a little bit of a failing of some of the ways we've
Yeah.
given awards out for different dashboard designs, where the question's always how good does it look? And
Instead
that
of
matters a lot
how useful
less
are they?
than like all the new morphisms and rounded corners and everything else, like fine and dandy.
Mhm.
But if the data quality is crap,
Yeah.
or the design doesn't actually have the metrics or the details that someone needs to answer a question or do something,
Yeah.
you can make all those design decisions you want and it still won't be impactful.
Impactful. Yeah. Because it still has to be useful mostly, most importantly. Another one. Oh yeah. So you were talking about
Mhm.
the little s. And so there's a question in qualitative versus quantitative data. So do you
Mhm.
actually try to measure your qualitative data somehow, like the non-number data, right?
Mhm.
Like the satisfaction or whatever you were calling the little s. Like, do you try to find a way to measure that?
To measure the little s, the numeric stuff, or the big S, the kind of impact
The
stuff.
non-numeric, the
The
non-numeric.
qualitative stuff. So little s is the numeric stuff. That's usually the
Oh,
stuff you
okay.
can semi-automate away. Like little s
Yeah.
success, those are the countable things that
Okay.
directionally tell us are people using it or not. They can be helpful in deciding if we're going to sunset a dashboard or not. Like if it's getting no page views for months, like why is it still on our server?
Yeah.
The big S success piece, I think, is really important, but is more iterative and more incremental, where depending on how frequently the dashboard is updated and you expect someone to actually go check it, you might check in every 3 months or so and
Mm-hmm.
try to go ahead and get feedback, which is easier to do if you have built a relationship with your users throughout the design process where they feel shared ownership of what
Yeah.
you've created. And then they're excited to tell you that they're like, look at this. We're like pulling it up in this meeting. We're doing these things.
Mhm.
There's an organization called In Supply that does health logistics in Kenya and Tanzania. And they have a model called impact teams. And part of that model is that their dashboards they actually bring up during a meeting on a big screen. And instead of expecting someone to just present exactly what the insights are, they actually pull up different charts or they look at them and they say, why did this happen? And then they have conversations about it because there's oftentimes insights or kind of context that's not in a database somewhere. It helps explain why, say, a shipment was delayed. So the refrigerated truck broke down, but we don't have data on our truck fleet inside of the dashboard, but someone knows that that happened. And they know that these dashboards get used on a regular basis in various different meetings, for example, and then can further kind of probe on what decisions or information was used to make decisions. But I think
Yeah.
creating a structure where whether it's a simple form or just doing an outreach email even, and then
Yeah.
capturing those pieces, it helps a lot if you're getting to the end of a year and someone says, well, what's the value in building for our organization and building all these data tools? And you
Yeah.
want to have some of those kind of vanity metric countable things
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
some of the big S success bits. And I mean, even the countable stuff, what is a good time on site for a dashboard? Are you staying a long time because you love it so much? Or are you staying a long time because you can't find what you're looking for and you're getting frustrated? So you
Mhm.
always need a little bit more to go on if you're going to make decisions about how you either change the dashboards or you talk about their value and impact.
Okay. That's awesome. Okay. There's another question here. It's a little bit long. I'm
I see.
curious.
Yeah, I read the accessibility one. It's a good one. Do you want to paraphrase it out to folks who are listening?
Okay, is that what this is? Sorry, I
Yeah.
hadn't read it yet. If you want to just talk about it, you're welcome to, because I don't know what this is. I don't understand the site improve. But
Well, so I don't know. I'm not familiar with Site Improve, Joel,
okay.
but the way he's framed it out is that functionally there's a slightly arbitrary overall accessibility score front and center on their dashboard because people like looking at it. But I worry that they're in danger of confusing it for objective reality. If it motivates them to keep working on accessibility, is that what matters? That's a great question, right? So when we think about the ways in which people see and respond to a number, especially one big number, we oftentimes want to make sure that there's added context or ways in which they can make sense of that number. Is that number good or bad? What does that look like? If that kind of accessibility score is actionable for someone, so like they see a low accessibility score and there's additional information that gives clear guidance on which different kind of accessibility checks failed, and even more importantly, perhaps which ones are most important to prioritize if someone's investing time and resources in improving the accessibility of their site or application, then that's helpful because then I both have a sense of like, am I doing well or not, and what can I do about it? If it's more from a shaming perspective of saying like this accessibility is poor on this and this application, red alert, and
Yeah.
all you're doing is making people feel bad about it, it makes me think back to some of the best 508 folks who I worked with when I was working on federal government contracts, who often saw improved accessibility not as just kind of the box to check. And these are the 508 managers who manage this for the federal government. It was not a box to check where you said we have to check all the boxes and everything must be perfect. It's how do we make incremental progress towards more accessibility? And we actually, a huge shout out to, from a dashboards perspective, Kent Eisenhuth, who's at Google, now at Waymo within the Alphabet family. But he actually helped to pioneer a lot of the work on accessibility on data visualization as part of the material design group at Google. And we have some insights from him around how he built out that community as part of improving data visualization tools and resources. And he has there's a ton of great under Google's material design, data visualization, accessibility content. There's a ton of great guidelines, including alt text information and different accessibility priorities. And so if you're curious about those pieces, I'd really encourage you to check that out. And we did try to weave accessibility bits in throughout the book. It's obviously not a exhaustive resource on things on that front.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say if you're on the accessibility topic as we wrap up is if you're not familiar with Frank Olavsky's work and his work on chartability, see like chart and then ability mashed together, it is one of the most comprehensive frameworks for assessing accessibility of data visualization projects and products, and might be of interest to folks who are really passionate about that space. So, but I think
Okay.
it's a very fair question on when we create indexes, Joel, and we make big numbers up that we put out there and say they're good or they're bad. We need to
Absolutely.
give context about why something's good or bad, and we need to make sure that someone sees some kind of path forward from that. And maybe it's motivating to see a low score, sure. But if you're someone who's actually pulling up this website to assess your accessibility anyways, I would guess you're being motivated either by a personal interest in making things more accessible or some sense of kind of compliance and fear, which is oftentimes why people do those kind of checks. And so what the actions are after that is a good question.
Mhm. No, that was awesome. Thank you very much, Amanda. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Yes. Thank you
And
so much for bearing with me through my coughs. I ran out of my water and I was like, well, shoot.
I know, I know. I think I had that about 2 weeks ago and it was awful because it just
Yeah.
kept coming the coughing. Yeah.
I
So
feel like it's just one of those things that just kind of pops up as we're getting into the fall season and into fall parts of the school year and everything else. But it was great to have a chance to connect with folks. If people have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. But thank you so much for hosting me
okay,
and having me tonight. And I will look forward to staying in touch with folks virtually. Have a great hack night. Enjoy the next hour.
perfect. Thank you.